Hi, and welcome to Mark's Motivational Podcast for this Tuesday, Arthur's Tuesday. So I'm delighted to be joined by another guest, Dave Green. He's a really good author, and he's after releasing a number of books. So I'm really looking forward to talking to Dave tonight about it. So you're very welcome along tonight, Dave.
Thanks for having me on. I'm not too far away from you. I live in Athenry, just outside of Galway, so just down the motorway, I think.
Yeah. Hey, you've nothing to do with writing that song, no? It feels about
No, but there is lots of fields around that. I can confirm
that. Yeah. No, thanks a million for joining us, You're very good. So we'll probably start off the podcast. If you want to tell people about the book series you have out there at the moment. If you could maybe let people know, the listeners know, and how they can purchase the books as well, it'd be great.
Sure, yeah. So I have two kind of series at the moment. They're both fantasy series. So I have one which is like dark fantasy, which is kind of like Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones kind of one, that's called In Solitude Shadow. So that's out at the moment. You can get it on Amazon, and you can get it in Waterstones and all those kind of places. Physical copies or ebook. It's been reviewed really well. It's up for a couple of awards, I think, as well, which is good. And then my other series that I have is like it's an urban fantasy noir. So it's kind of I don't know if you're familiar with the Dresden Files or anything, which is it's kind of like it's like a private investigator in a fantastical kind of world. So basically, it's called a Nick Halloran series. The first book is Dead Man Walking, and the second one is Devil Walks in Blood. But we've just done a new cover for the second one, and I've done it as a special edition, so that both the books are in the same one. And it's basically the private investigator, and he gets killed, but then he gets resuscitated. And when he's resuscitated, he realizes that heaven is real, but also so is hell, and we live in hell. Earth is hell, and he can see all this different stuff. So he wants, when he dies, he wants to get back into heaven because he's seeing it's real. So he's taking all these kind of cases and stuff and trying to keep his nose clean. But he's also trying to figure out like why is the world the way it is and all this kind of stuff. So it's quite fun. So they're quite different series that I do, but they're both fun to write.
Yeah, they sound very interesting. I must get my hands on a copy of them myself. Yeah, thanks very much. So have you always written yourself? Have you always been interested in writing, David?
I've not been writing very long, to be honest with you. It's something that I just really kind of picked up when the pandemic started. I'd always wanted to, and I started doing creative writing lessons just a bit like a year before the pandemic, and that was basically just going once a week when it was like term and everything like that. So, and doing writing exercises and everything. But I've always been a huge reader. Like I love reading. I have done since I was a kid. It was always something that I was like, I want to try it, at least try and see if I can do it. And it was always one of those things where I was like, you know what, I can't do it right now because of this or because of this. I'll do it this time, or I'll do it this time, I'll do it this time. It was always putting it off and putting it off.
Yeah.
So my son, I had a son, but he was my first kid, and I decided to stay at home to look after him. When my wife went on to finished maternity leave, and I was like, I need to do something else, otherwise I'm going to go insane.
Yeah, I know.
And so I was like, well, you know what, I'll do this. I'll give this writing thing a try. So started the creative writing lessons, and I was writing a book, a chapter a week, and these things. And when I finished that book, it was March 2020, and I just had this finished book, and I was like, I have no idea what to do with it. Let's just see what we can do. And I started kind of looking around on the online writing communities and found like submission calls for anthologies and other things like that. And I was like, okay, let's try and do this. So, and that was basically it. So like professionally, I only started March 2020, and so it's like I'm pretty inexperienced, but like it's been very, very successful since I started. Way more successful than I wanted to do, because when I started submitting stuff to places in March, I said to myself, if I get one thing published this year, then that's a success.
That's great.
And I
Yeah.
ended up having like something like 200 stories accepted in different publications, and then my own stuff as well. So it was, yeah, it went really, really well.
Yeah, that's brilliant, because that's funny, because I had one of the other questions to ask you. How did the pandemic affect your writing? So like that's a really success story from the pandemic, because I had a similar thing to happen to me as well. So that's brilliant, isn't it? That's really, really good.
Yeah, like I mean, it's funny because like I know it's a difficult one with a pandemic, because like you hear some people that have like achieved like amazing things during it, and you have other people that have really struggled because of,
Yeah.
and I think either way is just like you can understand either way, because I think with myself I was always quite introverted, so
Mm.
and because and because I'd already made the decision to stay at home with my son, forced onto me a little bit, I would have been kind of like, oh man, the walls are closing in, kind of thing,
Yeah, I
right?
know.
But yeah, so because I'd already kind of decided to do this, it was I just found it a lot kind of easier, and it was like almost like writing each night was kind of like a comfort blanket, because you'd hear all this stuff during the day, and you'd be looking at the news, and you'd have people texting you and doing video calls because like you couldn't see anyone. It was all this kind of like anxiety during the day and everything. And then once I got the boy to sleep and everything, it was like, right, okay, I'm just going to just disappear into my laptop and just create something and just do something. And yeah, and I just did that 6 days a week. So, I just, Friday was the only day that I didn't write in. I wrote every other day. And that was my kind of thing, where it was like, well, this is how I'm coping with the pandemic.
Mm. But that was a good strategy you had there for writing, like because some people don't have a kind of a strategy, they just kind of write whenever they have time. But like when you set something down, I think that's a good way of doing it, isn't it? Dave, would you agree with that?
Yeah, it worked for me. Like I mean, everyone's different. I
Different, yeah.
was I was talking to Ken Bruin, who does the Jack Taylor books. He has
Yeah, I've
the
heard of
Netflix.
him. Yeah.
Yeah, he lives in Galway. So you bump into him sometimes. I was doing something before the pandemic, and he was at the same thing, and I was just chatting to him, and he was like, yeah, he's like, I release like, he was like, he releases 2 books a year, and he basically says he writes every single day. He wakes up in the morning at about 6 o'clock, and he writes 2 pages, and he records it on a dictaphone, and he just leaves it, goes off the rest of his day. And then when he gets into bed at night time, he listens to the dictaphone. And then if he likes it, he leaves it. And if he doesn't, he just next morning deletes it and writes it again. But he's like, if I write 2 pages a day, 356 days, 365 days a year, then that's 800 odd pages.
Yeah.
And that's how he but you know, people that like you have like the most successful writer probably in the world is Stephen King, and he just like does writing sprints. He'll just like
Yeah.
he'll take a week and just write almost, well, in the 70s and 80s he was doing all sorts of stuff to keep himself awake to write. But I'm someone I need a routine. Like I kind of got out of the routine over the summer a little bit with like because everything was kind of opening up again a little bit, and it was like more distractions. And I kind of got out of my routine, and I kind of craved getting back in. So I've been looking forward to like autumn and winter. And like, yes, there'd be
Yeah.
nothing to do.
Yeah. Good stuff. And I suppose I'll ask you as well, when you're when you're writing, like you've done so well with the amount of books you've done so far. That's brilliant. Well done. But you'll have to kind of share them with me as well. I'll put them on the show notes for people to find the links. So if you share the links, I'll do that for you as well. But the question I was going to ask you as well, sometimes if sometimes you kind of hit a wall, metaphorically wall, when you're writing, like you could have writer's block. How do you motivate yourself to keep going if that happens to you, Dave?
It's a funny one. So when I first started kind of doing this, I was doing it kind of for my son. I was kind of like, I want him to have something when he's older to kind of look back and say, like, because I went to university and all that kind of stuff, but I kind of just fell into retail, and I was like in retail management for years. And when I kind of stopped that and kind of started looking after him, I was kind of like, I don't have anything to really show. no, what I've done in the last like however years. So I was like, that was the thing. That was the main motivation was that. And like whenever I kind of do things, I always kind of look for an external reason. But then I realized last year after getting something published and having these things, I was kind of like, that external thing is only going to get you so far. It needs to come from something you need. So I was like, I need to do it for myself. So it's like I need to do something for me and stop trying to say that like all these things are for other people and just say this is something that is for you that you want to do and you want to enjoy. So that's something that that only clicked with me in the last year really, and that's one. So when I do kind of struggle at, it's like, you know, this is something that you enjoy. You found something that it's not just a hobby. It's like it's something that you love to do and do it for yourself. And you know, sometimes you hit those kind of things. And what I've realized is just to keep writing, but not necessarily the thing that you're working on. So say I'm working on like a sequel to one of my books and kind of find it tough. What I'll do is I'll just instead of working on the story, I'll just like take one of those characters and just write a little short story about that character about a different point in their lives or something like that. Just to kind of keep it ticking and keep the brain ticking and that, but just do something else and just and then that kind of unlocks them. You're like, oh yeah, well, you might discover something about this character then that you didn't realize before, or you might like just have an idea where it's like, oh, this could actually work as this, and then you kind of go back into it then. But that's what I mean. That's what works for me. Like it might not work for other people, but it worked for me anyway.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot for sharing that, because you might have people that have the same kind of issues and that would really help them. So that's great. Thanks very much for that, David. And you did mention you've done you've got through to publishers and they've accepted it. That's brilliant. Like, and how has self-publishing worked out for you as well? Have you found that a really good avenue as well yourself?
Yeah, so I've not really gone into the self-publishing bits so much. I work with an independent publisher, so it's like it's a smaller so basically like with the writing you have self-published, independent, and then traditional. And then so the independent one is kind of like a halfway house between the two. And there's nothing wrong with self-publishing. Like I know loads of people do it, and it's maybe 10 years ago, it might have been something that people kind of looked down on a little bit, and maybe in some circles, some people still do, but there's so many really successful self-published authors these days. But with a traditional one, with the indie one, is that you still have that process where you're sending stuff out to someone who will either look at it and say no or yes, and then you go through that kind of, they have their in-house editors and they have their in-house whatever, so it's like more collaborative, and sometimes it can be a little bit like kind of fractious as well, because it's like it might be something that you really want and they're like it just doesn't work, and you have that kind of thing. Whereas like, you know, with self-published authors, a lot of them will hire or find an editor, but at the end of the day the book stops with them, and it's very much like, no, it's my decision, mine this. And when you go with trad, it's a lot more kind of, you know, our way or nothing. Right? Then you'll get it accepted, and they'll be kind of like, well, we want to change this, and this. Like, I know an Irish author who does historical fiction.
Okay.
And for a traditional publishing house, and one of the books got released in America for the first time. So they had she'd been working with the English branch for quite a while, and then the American, when they were getting it ready to go out to America, she was like, it's just a completely different level of just notes about from everyone. And she was like getting notes from people that she'd never met and didn't know who they were, and like change this and change this and change this, and it was like her agent was like kind of fighting back on some things, but like at the end of the day, they're like, listen, if we don't do it, they're not going to release it. And so it's like, it's different. It is actually something that I would like to try my hand at some point after I've kind of finished these series that I'm doing, because I have contracts with my publisher that I fulfill. But I would like to try it and see if I can do it. And I wouldn't rule out self-publishing in the future either, because I think yeah, I think it's all viable these days, and that's the great thing about the internet is that if you're unsure about how to do something, there's a video for it on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's great that you've got your son involved as well. That's brilliant because I'm similar. I got a lot of my stories from my kids' book from my own children, so it's great to be able to involve them with that for them to remember, isn't it, Dave?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, it's a bit young at the minute for what I kind of write, but I'm like, one
yeah,
day you
yeah,
may do this, and you might like it, and I
yeah.
hope you
Great.
do.
Yeah, great stuff. Great stuff. Yeah, and I was going to ask you as well. I can see you do a kind of a podcast as well. Do you want to talk a bit about that? What the podcast is about, Dave?
Sure, yeah,
Please.
yeah. So it's called Ease in the Reader. So it's which is named after a pub. So it's it's a Wheel of Time podcast. So I know like it's a Wheel of Time is like a huge one of my favorites, and obviously there's a Amazon TV show coming out at the end of this year. So like it's been kind of like it was supposed to be out already, but the pandemic kind of delayed what have you, like it delayed everything else.
I know. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I was on a podcast last year talking to someone who's a fantasy writer, and he was saying how he never well, he read the first one when he was in university because when he's Swedish and they had to read it as part of their syllabus
Okay.
for what he was doing in university, right? Which is like, wow, I wish I went to that university. That sounds great. But he hated it. He hated the first one because when you're forced to read something, like
Yeah,
you don't, you know. So I was like, oh, you should get back into it, like all this kind of stuff. So we decided to do this. It started as a podcast, and now there's a YouTube channel on the podcast. And
great.
it's called Ease in the Reader. So there's a pub in the Wheel of Time called Ease in the Badger, which always stuck with me. And I was like, well, what we're going to do is like I've read it 20 times now, the series altogether, and he's reading it for the first time. And so there'll be people that may have just been picking it up that'll follow along with us and whatever. So that's why it's called Ease in the Reader. But then we kind of look at it as well from like writing standpoint, and we look at like kind of techniques that Robert Jordan used and decisions that he made, and differences between the books then where he's kind of changed his style a little bit or found something that may have worked a little bit better, and mistakes as well that he's made, which he has been undocumented saying that he'd rather have done a different way. But what's interesting about looking at it is it's obviously getting updated now for the TV show, and it was quite progressive for its time with the themes that are in it and everything. But he started writing the first one in the early 80s, so it's like it's 40 years old now, and
Yeah.
things have changed, right? So it's interesting to kind of look at some things and go, you know what? Not even in some of the themes and some of the things that happen, you'd be like, oh, I don't think you get away with that these days. But
Yeah.
also the way that it's written, there's some things that you get told by editors that like never do this, never ever do this anymore. Well, it's in these books, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And like and other than Lord of the Rings, it's the most successful
Mm,
fantasy series of books of all time, right? So it's interesting to look at those kind of things. But that's kind of what we do. We talk about stuff to do with the TV show that's coming up, and any other kind of news. We have guests on from like the Wheel of Time community, and yeah, it's good. It's a good excuse to talk about the Wheel of Time for an hour or so once every 2 weeks.
great stuff. Great stuff. Yeah, share that with me as well so I can put it on the show notes for people to have a look, and I'll have a look myself. Thanks very much for that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well
great.
no worries.
Yeah. Yeah, so that probably moves on nicely to the next question. Do you have a favorite author or book yourself that kind of influenced yourself, Dave?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, Wheel of Time and Robert
Yeah,
Jordan, but
of
like
course, yeah.
that's not always my answer, so I'll say something else. So more like obviously like Tolkien as well with Lord of the Rings is like, and that's such an influence, right? You know, everything, and just again, just looking at like the world building that he did, and just the time. I mean, he never finished writing what he was working on. Like he died before he finished it, and it was like so many different versions of what he was working on. The Lord of the Rings was just a small part of it. But like more kind of modern. I really like Joe Abercrombie, who is kind of like is kind of like the main kind of face for like a movement in fantasy that's called grimdark, which is very kind of like low fantasy, where it's not much magic or anything, and it's very kind of like military, like almost military based, but it's like all about like normal people basically, and
Yeah.
it's very it's very, as it says, grim dark. It's very kind of like relentlessly grim. And there's a few, but he's very, very funny though. He's the grimness comes from like a real funny place with his one. Yeah, I've read some more grim dark books where it's just like relentlessly grim, and it's just like, oh, this is just, I just need this to be over, right?
Yeah.
And once I start reading something, I can't stop myself. I have to keep going. Joe Abercrombie, like, he's got a great sense of humor, and to tie it back in with Wheel of Time, I'm a big fan of Brandon Sanderson, who had his own, and now he's probably the biggest name in fantasy. But he finished the Wheel of Time series off after Robert Jordan died. He came in and finished the series off, and he's like, which is a daunting task, but he pulled it off really well, and he's yeah, he's very good. And one of like a review of In Solitude Shadow, my book, someone like a fancy website said it was the best fantasy novella they've read since Brandon Sanderson's Emperor's Soul, which was really I was tempted to print it off and just stick it on my wall, just like,
Yeah.
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 I haven't done that. I might do one day.
If the pandemic goes on much longer, you probably will.
Yeah.
But no, that's great. That's a great list. Yeah, and I suppose movies as well. I know Lord of the Rings would be a big one for you. I can tell. But any other movies yourself that one of your favorites? Your favorites?
Yeah, I'm a big cinephile. Like I studied film at university, so like I love film. That's what I wanted. That's actually when I was a kid. That's what I wanted to do. I was like, I'd love to be not an actor. I was like, I'd love to be a film director.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, I love so many films. Like one of, geez, I can't even. I'm a big fan of westerns. Love westerns, right? Since I was a kid, and there's so many classic ones that are just like, Unforgiven is probably the best one, the Clint Eastwood one.
Yeah.
I love noir films, so like LA Confidential, Chinatown. Love all the I love films in the 40s like Casablanca and stuff like that as well. But make it a bit more modern. Like I watched the Matrix Resurrections trailer today, and I was like, oh man, I can't wait for this, because I still remember the first time. I'm a big Star Wars fan, and like the Matrix came out. Yeah, the Matrix came out the same month as the Phantom Menace, and I remember being so disappointed with the Phantom Menace at the time. I was like 16 at the time, and I went to watch the Matrix like I think the same day actually, because they're both in the cinema, and I was just like blown away by the Matrix. And I'd seen the trailers for it and just thought, I was like, look, Keanu Reeves in it. I was like, this is gonna be crap.
Yeah.
At that time, that's what it was like. He was in like Johnny Mnemonic and all this kind of stuff, and it was like, so I was like, oh, I'll just go and watch it, and I was like, just amazed by it. And yeah, and I like the sequels. Like I have a soft spot for the second one, and can give or take the third. But I watched this trailer today, and I was like, yeah, I'm ready for more Matrix.
Oh yeah, class. Yeah, I'm with you there. Like, no, it's a great list there. Thanks very much. And because Clint Eastwood was one of my favorites growing up as well. I'm with you there. Great. Yeah. And music wise, what kind of music do you like to listen to when you're not doing the writing?
Well, I listen to music while I write. I'm one of those people. Yeah, I do. But I usually put on like kind of playlists that suits what I'm kind of writing. So I listen to a lot of film scores when I'm writing, and stuff like that. But again, like I've got quite a big mix. Like I have a Led Zeppelin tattoo on my arm.
Class. So
Led Zeppelin would be big on the Beatles. I think if I went on Mastermind, like I can. There's two things that I think that I could do well on Mastermind. It'd be Beatles and Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Have you ever seen Led Zeppelin live? Have you ever seen them?
Oh no, I could have. I when they had the reunion tour, I was tempted to get tickets, but I was kind of like, if the rubbish, it'll just destroy my life.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Right, so I didn't, but apparently they were amazing as well. I really regret not doing it, but yeah, let's say I'm into like kind of rebel radio kind of outlaw country, like Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson and all that kind of stuff. Just basically anything that's not from this decade, really. Just anything before. You get to a certain kind of age, and you just kind of, it's just like, I know what I like, and it came out a long time ago.
Yeah, big time. Now, this has been great. Thanks very much for coming on, and I hope your books do really, really well. So this is just the last question, just because it's a motivational podcast. If you could kind of say to anybody in writing or any aspect, what kind of advice would you give them to keep themselves motivated? I suppose through the rest of this pandemic and these hard times.
One of the main things is to write something that you would love to read yourself, and showing it other people is important. Letting other people see it is important, especially when you're writing it, like, because just to see if it works. But it has to be something that you're going to enjoy, and then once it's ready to come out, it's always going to be people that will enjoy it as well. And even if it's just one person that enjoys it and it sticks with them, it's going to change it's going to add value to their, like, their life, basically, because they're seeing something that you've created and it's there. And I went into my local library a few weeks ago, and I saw my books in the library, and that was just like, it was such a thrill, and it wasn't anything that I expected that I'd ever see. And it was like, you know what, some kid is just going to pick my book up at some point and read it, and it may be something that sticks with them, and that's just a great kind of thought to have. So it's creating stuff is difficult, as you know. Like you do it, and it's there's always a lot of, like, barriers in the way and a lot of hurdles to overcome. And once you've done it, it's something to be proud of.
No, that's great. That's brilliant advice. Thanks very much, Dave. Yeah, so Dave Green, everybody, thanks very much for coming on tonight. It was great being talking to you this evening.
No worries. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks a lot for everybody for tuning in to today's podcast, Mark's Motivational Podcast. That was Dave Green. I'm going to share all the links to your books and your podcast as well. So so everybody check that out. So thanks for listening. Talk to you real soon. Take care.